There are some truths in the world that they sit heavy, profound, sometimes deeply unsettling. And some secrets, they just refuse to give up their answers, don't they? They just linger. Today, we're going to recount some stories. It's a series of baffling, really brutal cases where justice, well, it just seems impossible to reach. We're not necessarily doing a deep dive into specific sources today, more like telling the story of these enduring mysteries. The accounts come from various explorations into true crime, looking at the facts of some really haunting unsolved cases. Our aim here is to recount these chilling narratives, lay out the known facts, and really invite you to think about the big unanswered questions that still haunt us, sometimes decades later. Understanding these events, I think, even the horror of them, it's important to grasp their impact.
Absolutely. And these cold cases, these shadows, they resonate, don't they? There's this fundamental human need, I think, for closure, for understanding, especially when you're faced with such profound injustice. We want to connect the dots, find some meaning, see accountability.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's start our journey into this unsettling reality in Honolulu, Hawaii. Between 1985 and 1986, a series of really mysterious murders plagued the area. It felt sinister, like someone was preying on the vulnerable. There were 5 victims, 5 women. And what's particularly eerie, really unsettling, is the common thread. All 5 bodies were found in different bodies of water around Honolulu. That detail, it suggests a killer with a very specific, maybe almost ritualistic method. The profile that emerged was, well, an opportunist, someone targeting vulnerable women, places like bus stops where they might be alone, isolated. But here's where it gets incredibly frustrating from an investigation standpoint. A suspect was interrogated. He even failed a lie detector test. But ultimately, he was never charged for these murders.
And that case, it really highlights the challenge, doesn't it? Our legal system needs certainty, but it struggles when direct forensic evidence is, well, thin. A failed polygraph, for instance, it's generally not admissible in court as definitive proof. Its reliability is still debated, and results can be influenced by so many things besides just telling the truth or lying. So investigators are forced to rely on circumstantial leads, and proving those beyond a reasonable doubt is it's incredibly tough, leaves them in a real bind.
Right. A dead end, essentially. Okay, from those disturbing waters in Honolulu, let's shift to a case that absolutely exploded into the public eye. December 1996. The tragic death of 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey. This story unfolded with terrifying speed. She was reported missing, and then just 8 hours later, her body was found in the basement of her own home. The official cause of death was just horrifying. Asphyxia due to strangulation associated with cranial cerebral trauma. So basically a severe head injury happened alongside the strangulation. It points to incredible violence. And what followed was just this huge wave of public outrage. So much suspicion fell on JonBenét's parents. The discovery of that long, kind of bizarre ransom note written on paper from inside the house, and maybe how the family initially dealt with the police investigation, it all just fueled that suspicion. The media frenzy was intense. It really became a trial by public opinion, didn't it? Long before any real charges. And now, decades later, the case is still unsolved, though significantly her parents have been officially ruled out as suspects, which shifts the focus back to an unknown killer.
Yeah, the JonBenét case, beyond just the complexities of the investigation itself, it really became this pressure cooker. The public's demand for instant answers just slammed up against the slow, careful pace needed for proper forensic work. It's a really stark example of how intense media pressure, public speculation, it can actually maybe inadvertently steer an investigation, or at least prejudice public opinion. It really makes you question how these societal narratives, sometimes based on incomplete information, can impact the search for actual justice, maybe even obscure the truth sometimes.
A really complicated legacy there. Okay, next let's delve into the early 1970s. A terrifying figure known only as Charlie Chop-Off. Between 1972 and 1974, in New York City, several young black children were brutally murdered by this person. The community was terrified, and the details of his first known victim, they're just particularly horrific. They set a grim tone for what followed. 8-year-old Douglas Owens, he was found stabbed nearly 40 times, and tragically, his genitals were mutilated. This killer inflicted just unimaginable pain and terror, seemed driven by something deeply disturbed. Then amidst all this fear, what seemed like a major break happened. A man named Erno Soto, he actually claimed responsibility for the murders. But in this incredibly frustrating twist for police, they found really compelling reasons to believe it was a false confession. Soto was never charged. The real killer just vanished, remained elusive. And the case, well, it's gone cold since then, leaving these unspeakable crimes without resolution, and this chilling question mark over who Charlie Chop-Off really was.
hmm And that case, it really underscores the dangers, the complexities of false confessions. I mean, a confession might seem like the ultimate breakthrough, right? But law enforcement has to rigorously check its authenticity. Things like wanting attention, mental health struggles, even sometimes coercive interrogation methods can lead people to falsely confess. And that doesn't just divert crucial resources away from finding the real killer.
Yeah.
It also deeply traumatizes the person who falsely confessed. It's a critical challenge investigators have to handle very carefully to make sure justice is actually served.
It's a minefield for investigators. Okay, staying in the early 70s, let's head across the country to San Francisco. The city was plagued by another series of unsettling murders, this time by a killer nicknamed the Doodler. This person was responsible for the deaths of at least 14 men, spreading terror through the city's gay community at the time. And his habit, his M.O., was particularly chilling. He would apparently sketch his victims before becoming intimate with them, and then he'd brutally stab them to death. This sort of methodical, disturbing ritual just added another layer of horror. Now, here's where the story takes this just heartbreakingly frustrating turn. 3 men actually survived encounters with the Doodler. Just imagine. 3 potential witnesses who could have identified him, could have brought him to justice, ended the killing spree. But these men chose not to testify in court. Why? Well, out of fear. An understandable fear, maybe, but devastating in its consequence. Fear of public backlash, of being outed in an era that was far less tolerant. Because they didn't testify, the Doodler, as far as anyone knows, remains free. His crimes unpunished. The victims' families still without answers.
It's such a stark reminder, that case. The profound impact of fear, of societal prejudice on victims, and the huge challenge that poses to the justice system. The fact that those survivors were reluctant to testify, rooted in very real fears about stigma, discrimination, well, it effectively shielded the perpetrator. It's a sobering illustration, really. The pursuit of justice isn't just about police work or evidence. It also depends on the willingness, the ability of victims and witnesses to come forward. Often at great personal cost, especially when facing social pressures or, systemic prejudice.
Yeah, a chilling example of how societal factors can obstruct justice. Okay, we're going to conclude our stories today with a case that really makes you question the very nature of justice itself. The West Memphis 3. This started back in 1993. The scene discovered in West Memphis, Arkansas, was just. It was horrific. The bodies of 3 8-year-old boys, Stevie Branch, Christopher Byers, Michael Moore, they were found in a muddy creek, mutilated, hog-tied, meaning their hands and feet bound together behind them with their own shoelaces. Just awful. Then what became a really rapid and controversial chain of events, 3 teenagers, Damian Eccles, Jesse Miskelly, and Jason Baldwin, were charged and imprisoned for these murders. And what the chilling is they were convicted with basically no direct physical evidence tying them to the crime scene or the victims. It was largely based on, well, what many believe were coerced confessions, especially from Miskelly, and theories about their interest in heavy metal, the occult, things like that. Eccles got the death sentence. The other 2, life in prison. The public quickly called them the West Memphis 3, but almost immediately huge public doubt started to surface. Support for the teenagers grew. Many people, including celebrities like Johnny Depp, Eddie Vedder, they believed these teens were innocent. It sparked this global movement demanding their release. Then came the turning points, big ones. In 2007, new forensic evidence emerged, DNA testing specifically, and it pointed blame away from the West Memphis 3. And incredibly, a key witness from the original trial, someone who testified against them back in the 90s, she came forward, admitted under oath that everything she told the police back then was just fabricated, made up under duress, she said, under fear. These were huge revelations. So after nearly 2 decades behind bars, the 3 men, now middle-aged, were released from prison in 2011. They entered something called an Alford plea, which is unusual. It meant they maintained their innocence, but acknowledged the state had enough evidence to potentially convict them again. But here's the truly chilling, frustrating truth that remains. The actual killer, or killers, of those 3 little boys, still free today. And that, I have to say, is deeply disturbing.
Oh, absolutely. The West Memphis 3 case is just. It's such a powerful, sobering example of wrongful convictions, and it really highlights the critical role of new forensic evidence, how science evolves and can help correct past mistakes, even in cold cases. It shows how initial biases, community panic, flawed testimony, how they can lead to these devastating miscarriages of justice. The fight for real justice in cases like this often relies on ongoing investigation, scientific advances like DNA, and just the courage of people to challenge past wrongs even decades later. It forces us to confront the limits of our justice system and the profound consequences when it gets things wrong.
Yeah. Profound consequences indeed.
Yeah.
So as we reflect on these stories today, this shared unsettling thread really emerges, doesn't it? The reality that some of the most brutal, baffling crimes just remain unsolved. Perpetrators walk free. Communities are left without closure, grappling with these huge unanswered questions. These aren't just old stories. They feel like open wounds in our collective history. Reminders of how fragile our sense of security really is.
What's fascinating here, I think, is how these stories, despite all their differences, different times, places, circumstances, they all seem to underscore this fragile, often incomplete nature of justice. They remind us that finding the truth can be a long, difficult, and sometimes ultimately an unsuccessful journey, leaving this indelible mark on families, communities, everyone involved.
So it leaves us with a question, doesn't it? What does it mean for us, for society, when these profound questions of life and death just remain unanswered? What kind of shadows do these cold cases cast on how we see the world, even decades later? What lessons are we still trying to learn from them? Thank you for joining us as we recounted these, frankly, unsettling cases. We hope this exploration has given you maybe a deeper understanding of these complex, tragic events. If you're drawn to stories like these deep dives to difficult subjects, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Horror Docs channel for more. Until next time, stay safe. And perhaps be aware of the shadows that still linger out there.